When I look back at my life, there is one question I cannot escape. How did I become this man? A man who spent his life loving one person and then spent the rest of it destroying everyone who stood between us. Perhaps at the end of my life, I finally understood something. Hatred does not begin with hatred. It begins with pain, with humiliation, with losing something you believe belongs to you. And my story began long before I became Heathcliff, the man people feared. It began when I was only a boy nobody wanted. A boy with no family, no home, and no idea where he belonged. Years earlier, a man named Earnshaw had found me wandering alone in the streets of Liverpool. He brought me back to his home, Wuthering Heights. I remember that house. Cold wind, open fields, the dark rooms, and two children who would change my life forever. His son, Hindley, and his little daughter, Catherine. Hindley looked at me and saw an intruder. Catherine looked at me and saw another child. I didn't know it then, but that little girl would become the most important person in my entire life. And Hindley would become the first person I ever learned to hate. But before I tell you about the man I became, let me take you back to the beginning, to the day I first walked through the doors of Wuthering Heights, because that was where everything began. I was still young when I began to understand that my place in Wuthering Heights depended on one man, Mr. Earnshaw. He was the only person in that house who truly stood between me and Hindley's hatred. As long as he was alive, Hindley could not do whatever he wanted to me. But my father was growing weaker. He spent more and more time sitting beside the fire, his health slowly failing him. And whenever he heard Hindley speak against me, he became angry. He had seen the way his son treated me, and he would not tolerate it. Hindley hated that. He believed I had taken something from him. His father's affection, his place in the house, perhaps even his father's love. And I could feel that hatred growing every day. Then one day, Mr. Earnshaw finally had enough. He sent Hindley away to boarding school. For the first time, the house became quiet, and Catherine and I were free to be together. We spent our days outside. She taught me what she had learned. We worked together. We played together. We ran through the fields as if the whole world belonged to us. For a while, I forgot that I was an orphan. I forgot that Hindley hated me. I forgot that one day everything could change. Then, 3 years later, Mr. Earnshaw died. It was an October night, and with his death, the only man who had protected me was gone. Hindley returned home. He brought his wife, Frances, with him. And the moment he became master of Wuthering Heights, I knew my life had changed. First thing he did was take away everything my father had given me. He forced me to work outside like the other servants. No more education, no more privileges, no more protection. I was no longer treated as a member of the family. I was simply Heathcliff, the orphan, the servant, the boy Hindley had finally gained the power to punish. And yet Catherine stayed close to me. Hindley tried to separate us. He wanted to break whatever bond remained between us. But Catherine only came closer. She spent more time with me in the fields. She tried to teach me what she had learned. And for a while, I believed that no matter what Hindley did, Catherine would always remain on my side. I was wrong, because one night, Hindley drove both of us out of the house. and Catherine and I decided to run away together. We were still children. I was 13. She was 12. We had no idea that the place we were about to visit would change everything between us. That night, we went to the home of the Lintons. We stood outside their window and watched their children. Edgar, Isabella. They lived in a world completely different from ours. A world of wealth, manners, beautiful clothes, and warm rooms. Then a dog discovered us. It attacked Catherine and injured her leg. The Lintons recognized her as Mr. Earnshaw's daughter. They took her inside. They decided to keep her there while she recovered. And me? They sent me home. I walked back to Wuthering Heights alone. And for the first time in my life, I realized that Catherine and I might not belong to the same world anymore. When Catherine finally returned to Wuthering Heights, I almost didn't recognize her. She had been away for 5 weeks. 5 weeks in the Linton household. 5 weeks surrounded by things that had always been foreign to me. Beautiful clothes, good manners, warm rooms, a life that seemed so far away from the rough world we knew at Wuthering Heights. And when she came back, she was different. The wild girl who had once run through the fields with me had become a young lady. She dressed beautifully. She spoke differently. She carried herself differently. I remember looking at her and feeling something I couldn't explain. She was still Catherine, but suddenly there was a distance between us. She looked at me and told me I should wash myself, that I should change my clothes, that I could become more presentable. Perhaps she only wanted to help me, but I didn't want to become someone else. I didn't want to change myself just so I could fit into the world she had discovered. I was Heathcliff, and that was who I intended to remain. So I refused, and slowly, something between Catherine and me began to change. We were still together, but it was no longer the same. She had seen another life, a life with Edgar Linton, a life of wealth, elegance, and respect. And I could feel that world pulling her away from me. 3 years passed. Hindley's wife gave birth to a son. His name was Hareton. But that same year, tragedy came again. Francis died from tuberculosis. Hindley lost the woman he loved. And after that, he sank deeper into drinking and despair. I watched all of it. I watched Hindley destroy himself. And I watched Catherine grow closer to the Lintons. By then, she was 15. Edgar Linton had fallen in love with her, and Catherine returned his feelings. One day, she went to speak with Nellie. She told her that Edgar had proposed to her, and she had accepted. She described him as handsome, wealthy, and pleasant. Then she explained why she could never marry me. If she married Heathcliff, she said, she would lose her social standing. She would lose her place in the world. But there was something else. She believed that by marrying Edgar, she could use his money to help me, to give me the chance to escape Hindley's control. Because despite everything, she still loved me. But I never heard that part. I heard only the words that destroyed me. I heard her say that marrying me would mean losing her status. And that was enough. I walked away. I didn't wait to hear the rest. I didn't give her a chance to explain. That night, Catherine searched for me in the rain. She couldn't find me. Soon she became seriously ill. The Lintons took her to their estate and cared for her. And while she recovered, I disappeared. 3 years would pass before I returned. And when I came back to Wuthering Heights, I would no longer be the boy Catherine had known. 3 years had passed since I left. 3 years since I had heard Catherine say that marrying me would cost her her social standing. 3 years since I walked away without waiting to hear the rest of what she meant. During those years, I disappeared. No one at Wuthering Heights knew where I had gone. And perhaps they imagined that the boy they had known was gone forever. They were right. When I finally returned, I was no longer the poor, humiliated boy who had once been forced to work outside. I came back as a different man. I was wealthy, well-dressed, tall, confident, the kind of man people could no longer look down on. But the money had not changed what was inside me. If anything, it had given my anger a purpose. I returned to Wuthering Heights and rented a place nearby. Hindley was no longer the powerful man I remembered. After losing his wife, he had fallen into drinking and gambling. He was reckless, bitter, and desperate. I saw his weakness immediately, and I knew exactly how to use it. I encouraged his drinking. I encouraged his gambling. I watched him destroy himself, little by little. I didn't need to fight him. I only needed to wait. But Hindley was not the only person I had returned for. There was another house I needed to enter. The Lintons. Catherine was there. She was married to Edgar now. She had chosen him, and I wanted her to see the man I had become. So I began visiting the Linton estate. Catherine knew I was back, and so did Edgar. But there was another person who began watching me. Isabella Linton. She became fascinated by me. She fell for me in a way I never intended. I did not love her, but I knew something she didn't. If Edgar died without an heir, Isabella could inherit the Linton fortune. And I wanted revenge against Edgar. I wanted revenge against Catherine. So I allowed Isabella to believe that I cared for her. I played the part of a man in love. I visited her. I spoke gently to her. I let her believe that she was special to me. But it was all part of my plan. Catherine eventually confronted me. She told me to stay away from Isabella. She knew I did not love her, and I didn't deny it. Instead, I told Catherine the truth. I had come back for revenge. Edgar saw me speaking with Catherine. He became jealous. He believed there was still something between us, and he ordered me to stay away from his home. But by then, the damage had already been done. Catherine and Edgar began fighting. Edgar demanded that she choose between him and me. And Catherine, furious at being controlled, stopped eating. She wanted to punish her husband. But her body was already fragile from the illness she had suffered years earlier. Soon, her condition became worse. She became feverish, confused. She began seeing things that were not there. And while Catherine was lying inside that house, fighting for her life, I was carrying out another part of my revenge. I convinced Isabella to run away with me, and I brought her back to Wuthering Heights. She thought she was going there because I loved her. She didn't yet understand what she had walked into, and by then I had already decided. Everyone I hated would pay for what had happened to me. I had returned to Wuthering Heights with one purpose, revenge. And now, Catherine was lying inside Thrushcross Grange, sick, confused, and barely holding on. I knew she was suffering. But instead of going to her, I turned my anger toward Isabella. She had followed me willingly. She believed she loved me, but I had never loved her. I had only seen her as another piece of the game I was playing against Edgar. And when Catherine became seriously ill, I took Isabella back to Wuthering Heights. There she discovered what I truly was. I did not treat her as a wife. I treated her as someone who had become trapped in the consequences of my hatred. I left her to endure the house with Hindley, whose drinking had turned him into a broken and unstable man. Even Hareton, his young son, had grown up surrounded by anger and neglect. Isabella began writing letters to Nellie. She begged her to tell Edgar that she wanted to go home. She wanted her brother to forgive her, but Edgar refused. To him, Isabella had made her own choice. He would not bring her back. He wanted her and me to stay far away from his life. And so my revenge continued. But while I was destroying Isabella's life, Catherine was getting worse. Her mind was clouded by fever and illness. She was carrying a child, and I knew that if I stayed away, I might never see her again. I could have left. I could have walked away and let the past die with her. But there was one thing I still wanted. I wanted to see Catherine. So I forced Nellie to help me. She brought me to her. And when I finally stood before Catherine again, all the anger I had carried for years seemed to disappear. For the first time, there were no accusations. No Edgar. No Isabella. No Hindley. No revenge. Only the two of us. We finally said what we had been too proud, too hurt, and too afraid to say before. We understood how deeply we had loved each other. And perhaps, for one brief moment, I was no longer the man who had returned for revenge. I was simply the boy who had once run through the fields with Catherine. But that moment would not last. That night, Catherine gave birth to a daughter. The child was born prematurely, and only 2 hours later, Catherine died. The woman I had loved all my life was gone. Her daughter was named Catherine after her mother, but I would remember her as Kathy. And after Catherine's funeral, Isabella finally escaped from Wuthering Heights. She fled south, far away from me. Months later, she gave birth to a son. She named him Linton. And while the world around me continued to change, I was left with the one thing I had wanted for so long. Catherine was gone. My revenge had cost me everything. And yet, I still wasn't finished. Catherine was gone, but I was not finished. After her death, I had nothing left to lose. Isabella escaped from Wuthering Heights, carrying my child with her. Months later, she gave birth to a son. She named him Linton. I did not see him then. I did not know him. But years later, that boy would become another piece of my revenge. After Catherine died, Edgar raised her daughter Kathy with tenderness. He wanted to protect her from everything connected to Wuthering Heights. He did not want her to know me. He did not want her to know the world that had destroyed her mother. And perhaps he thought he could keep the past away from her. But the past has a way of finding you. 6 months after Catherine's death, Hindley died. His drinking had finally destroyed him. And when he died, Wuthering Heights was no longer really his. He had mortgaged the house to me to pay for his drinking and gambling. So I became its owner, and Hareton became mine to control. I remembered exactly what Hindley had done to me. The humiliation, the hard labor, the feeling of being treated as though I were worth nothing. So I gave Hareton the same life. I kept him from learning to read and write. I made him work. I wanted him to suffer the way I had suffered. At the time, I thought that was justice. But looking back now, I wonder whether I was really punishing Hindley or simply creating another version of myself. Then, 12 years after Isabella escaped, she became seriously ill. She knew she was dying. So she wrote to Edgar and asked him to take Linton and raise him. Edgar agreed. He brought the boy home, but Linton stayed only one night. I learned that my son had arrived, and I demanded that he be brought to Wuthering Heights. Edgar had no choice. Linton came to live with me, and that was when I finally had another piece on the board. Kathy was 16 when she first encountered me. She was walking with Nellie near Wuthering Heights. I saw her, the daughter of Catherine. For a moment, it felt as though I was looking at the past. But this time, I had a plan. I introduced Kathy to Linton, and I encouraged their feelings for each other. They were cousins, but I didn't care. I needed Kathy to become attached to my son, because I knew that if Edgar died, her inheritance would matter, and I wanted it. I had spent years taking everything from the people I blamed for my suffering. Now I was getting closer to taking the last thing they had left: their home, their wealth, their future. I thought I was finally winning. But there was something I had not understood. Children were not responsible for what happened between Catherine and me, and yet I was preparing to make them pay for it. The revenge that began with my childhood was now being passed on to another generation. For years, I had believed that revenge would satisfy me. I had taken Wuthering Heights. I had taken Hindley's property. I had turned Hareton into what I once was. And now I had Linton. But there was still one thing I wanted. Kathy. She was Catherine's daughter. And somehow, every time I looked at her, I was reminded of the woman I had lost. When Kathy turned 16, she encountered me near Wuthering Heights. I invited her inside. Then I introduced her to Linton. He was weak from childhood, but I knew exactly what I wanted. I wanted Kathy to become attached to him. I encouraged their relationship. I pushed them closer together. And slowly, Kathy began to care for my son. She did not know what I was planning. She did not know that I was looking beyond their feelings. I was looking at the inheritance, at Thrushcross Grange, at everything Edgar possessed. Then Linton's health began to deteriorate. Edgar was growing weaker too, and I knew my opportunity was coming. Kathy was 17 when I made my final move. I used Linton to lure her and Nellie to Wuthering Heights. Once they arrived, I locked them inside. Kathy begged to leave. Her father was dying. She needed to go home, but I gave her a choice. Marry Linton or never see your father again. She agreed. But even after she accepted the marriage, I kept her imprisoned. I wanted Edgar to spend his final days alone. I wanted him to feel the helplessness I had felt for so many years. Eventually, Kathy managed to escape. She reached her father just in time. Edgar was dying, and when he asked about her marriage, she lied. She told him she was happy. Then Edgar died. With his death, Cathy inherited Thrushcross Grange. But she was already married to my son, and now I controlled both sides of the family. I had finally achieved what I had spent decades pursuing. The Earnshaws, the Lintons, their houses, their wealth, their future. Everything was mine. I dismissed almost everyone from Wuthering Heights. I kept only Nellie. Then I brought Cathy back to the house. Linton was desperately ill. He would not live much longer. And I knew that once he died, the last obstacle between me and everything I wanted would disappear. But something strange was happening. While I was busy winning, I had begun to lose interest in the victory. I had spent half my life trying to destroy the people who had hurt me. And now, when there was almost nothing left for me to destroy, I found myself thinking about Catherine again. By then, I had everything I once thought I wanted. Wuthering Heights was mine. Thrushcross Grange was mine. The fortunes of both families had fallen into my hands. Linton was dying. Cathy was trapped in a life she had never chosen. And yet, I felt no satisfaction. Linton eventually died. Cathy became cold and distant. She had lost her father. She had lost her freedom. And now she had lost her husband. I had taken almost everything from her. But I began to realize something I had refused to admit for most of my life. Cathy was not Catherine. She was her daughter. She had done nothing to me. And yet I had made her suffer simply because she carried her mother's name. Meanwhile, Hareton had changed. For years, I had kept him ignorant. I had wanted him to experience the same humiliation I had suffered under Hindley. Cathy had entered his life, and slowly something changed in him. He began teaching himself to read. He tried to become a better man. Even when Cathy mocked him, he continued to treat her with kindness. And eventually, Cathy began to see what I had refused to see. Hareton was not the brute she had imagined. He was simply another person who had been shaped by someone else's hatred. She began teaching him to read, and Hareton began protecting her. Two of them grew closer. Their relationship was different from everything Catherine and I had known. There was no revenge, no pride, no desire to possess one another. Just two wounded people learning how to become better together. And perhaps that was the moment I finally understood. I had spent my entire life trying to repeat my own suffering in other people. But Hareton and Cathy were breaking the pattern. They were doing what Catherine and I had never been able to do. They were letting the past remain in the past. And as they grew closer, I found myself caring less and less about the world around me. I stopped wanting revenge. I stopped caring about the houses, the money, the inheritance. All of it suddenly seemed meaningless. There was only one thing left in my mind. Catherine. I began visiting her grave. I would sit there for hours, sometimes for an entire day. I barely ate. I barely slept. I wanted only one thing now: to be free from this life, to be with her again. And slowly, the man who had spent decades fighting everyone around him finally began to surrender. What was left of me I spent most of my life believing that revenge would make the pain disappear. I blamed Hindley for humiliating me. I blamed Edgar for taking Catherine from me. I blamed Catherine for choosing another life. And one by one, I made them pay. And eventually, I even used their children to continue a hatred that had begun long before they were born. But in the end, I had won everything and gained nothing. Catherine was still gone. And when I finally watched Kathy and Hareton grow closer, I saw something I had never been able to create. A future without hatred. Perhaps that was my final punishment. To realize that the people I had spent my life trying to destroy had finally moved on, while I was still trapped in the past. I spent my life loving Catherine. Then I spent my life punishing the world because I had lost her. And only at the end did I understand that love and possession are not the same thing. I thought revenge would give me peace. It never did. The only thing that finally brought me peace was letting go. And perhaps that is the real story of my life. But the story of a man who could not let go of his pain until there was almost nothing left of him. If this story made you see Heathcliff, Catherine, and Wuthering Heights differently, don't just leave with the story. Leave with the question, how much of our lives can we lose by refusing to let go of the past? If you enjoyed this kind of storytelling, like this video and subscribe to Through Their Eyes. Here we don't simply summarize great books. We tell the stories through the eyes of the people who live them. And if you want to experience Wuthering Heights in its complete form, with all the details and emotions that a summary can never capture, you can find the book through the link in the description. Until the next story, don't just read the story. See it through their eyes.